Christy, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Here I like to talk about mythology, folklore, conspiracies, controversies, and pretty much anything else that I like. So if any of that sounds like the kind of stuff that you like as well, then I would highly suggest that you subscribe, give the video a like as well. Why not? Get yourself some good karma. So today we're going to be talking about Elena De Hoyos, her life, her tragic death, and the possibly even more tragic things that happened to her after her death. There is a big trigger warning today. We talk about illness, death, stillbirth, grave robbing, and necrophilia. So if any of that doesn't sound good to you, I really don't blame you. I'll see you in another one. Also, if you see me looking down, I just have my notes here just so that I don't get anything wrong, just in case you think I'm rude for not making direct eye contact with you. So this story is without a doubt fucking wild. Like it's the only way to describe it is wild. It's weird and it's hard to believe that it actually happened. Like this is something real that happened, and even the first time that I heard it, because it is so strange and morbidly fascinating in a way, that there's kind of that disconnect from forgetting that this happened to a real person. Like you kind of think that it's so out of the realm of possibility that you just think of it as like this really insane story, and you kind of forget that this was a real girl that this happened to. So this is a big reason for me actually doing this video, is that I wanted to bring some light to Elena, because I feel like she is often very forgotten in the story, even though it is about her. She's almost treated like she was an object. It's really, really bad, the shit that happened to her, and the more I learned about her from the little information that's available, I really felt for her, and it made me feel actually incredibly very sad for the things that has happened to her. So I want to talk a little bit about her and her life, and just a reminder that although there's nothing wrong with being curious about weird things or enjoying learning about the weird things that happen in the world, just to remember that she was a real person as well. In summary, Elena was a tuberculosis patient who died, and after death her body was stolen by her doctor, and he lived with, married, and even had a conjugal relationship with her corpse for 7 years. Now, some people refer to this story as like a gothic fairy tale, or a love so strong that even death couldn't keep them apart, the corpse bride, and it wasn't any of that. Actually, it wasn't a love story, it wasn't a gothic fairy tale, and it certainly wasn't a love so strong that even death couldn't keep them apart. I want to tell this whole story the best I can while being respectful to Elena, instead of treating her just like a spectacle who's part of this horror story. Like I said, of course it's interesting, of course it is morbidly fascinating, but it is also really very sad, and I just wanted to preface it by saying that. There is limited information out there on Elena before she became the corpse bride, as she's been deemed, but there is a really cool podcast, and that is called The Lost Diaries of Elena Hoyos, where they read excerpts from her diary that she wrote from the age of 16 up until she was about 22. I think there's limited diary entries that's available to hear, because when I stopped listening, I think she was still around about only like 17 or something like that. So I don't know if there's more to come or they've been removed from Spotify. So I only got to listen to limited amounts of them. And you know, I always feel weird when private diaries get made public, even when the person's been dead for decades, because part of me feels like it's still wrong to be prying into people's innermost thoughts and feelings in a diary that they thought would never be read by anyone. Like, it does feel wrong in a way. Like, so I was kind of torn between whether making her diary public was continuing just to kind of use her in a way for, like, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. If it was a way of just kind of stripping her of being a person and just seeing her as something, we can read her diaries, we can, you know. However, I think because there was so little information about Elena out there and people were just seeing her as like an object, that the diaries coming out was actually a good thing, because people got to hear a little bit of her personality, felt a connection with her, and realised that she was so much more than what happened to her when she died. And I think that the podcast did come from that good place of wanting to like shed some light on, hey, this is actually a real girl here with a real life, and she's not just the corpse bride. And like I said, the podcast really kind of snaps you into reality that she's like not a character in a story, she's a real person. I felt very sad listening to it, like, and I felt quite deeply connected to her. I think just knowing what was going to go on to happen, and when she speaks of growing old, and yeah, it was very, very sad. She was a real person. She had real friends, a family, anxieties, a dark sense of humour. She loved to sing and dance. She fangirled over Hollywood actors. She loved her best friend Juliet. Her family were a little bit crazy, and she just wanted what everyone else wants, and that is to be loved and to be happy. Anyway, I'm going to now get into the actual nitty-gritty of things. Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, or Elena as we'll be referring to her today, was born the 31st of July 1909, so she was a Leo and she was born in Key West, Florida. She was Cuban American and was bilingual. She spoke both Spanish and English. Her mother and father were Francisco and Aurora, and she had two sisters, a big sister called Florinda, who is better known as Nana, and then she had Celia, who was her younger sister, and her family were all devout Catholics. In her diary, she speaks about her sisters a lot and how they like bickered and how they had like empty heads, and if you cracked their head open you would find nothing, and she would like wish bad things on them. And I just think it was quite funny, because I think that's probably what most sibling relationships are like, especially at that time when she was like 16. I don't have siblings, but I can just imagine that they would really fucking irritate me if I did. It's also been said that she was quite shy, and I think she suffered a lot with some self-esteem issues as well, maybe not feeling good enough, and a lot of like self-critical thoughts and stuff as well, just going off what I heard in her diary. She loved going to the local club with her friends to dance, and she loved the actor Rudolph Valentino and had fantasies of the two of them ending up together, and that if only he met her and knew her heart, she knew that he would fall madly in love with her and take her away, and they would be together forever. And honestly, that's just how I was with Johnny Depp when I was younger. Editing me here, popping in just for a second, I completely forgot to add, she was also apparently a really very good singer as well, and people who were passing by and coming through Key West would often stop and ask for pictures and stuff of her, like with her, because she was so pretty and she had such a beautiful voice. Very small detail, but because we hardly have any information, I thought I'd add it in. Her best friend was called Juliet, and the two of them were very close. It seemed that she really adored her, and they could always make each other laugh no matter the situation. They seemed to just be really close, really true best friends. At only 16, she was married to Luis Mesa, who rolled cigars for a living, just like Elena's dad did at the tobacco factory. And she spoke about how his fingernails were always stained with tobacco, although she shouldn't know that information, but she did. From what I can gather, she fell pregnant before they were actually married, and possibly due to it being the 1920s or maybe a Catholic background played into it, she really hoped that Luis would marry her. Luis, I think Luis is how you pronounce it. I'm really sorry if it's not. I'm not sure how much of that was really them actually wanting to be married, or how much of that was pressure just from the time and it being the right thing to do. I know that she prayed to God a lot. She prayed for a happy life. She prayed that Luis would love her, promised that she would be a good wife, and most of all prayed that her baby would be healthy. The two of them were convinced that they were having a baby boy, and even though her mother-in-law spoke about how ridiculous it was that you can't possibly know what you're actually having before it's born, they were super convinced because Luis had took a strand of Elena's hair and put it on her wedding ring, held it above her belly, and said if it circled round in circles, they were having a girl, and if it went back and forward, they were definitely having a boy, and it went back and forward, so they knew that they were having a boy, and they were going to name him after his daddy. Even though Elena still felt like she was a child herself and didn't really feel like she was grown up enough to be a wife, I guess, she still felt very young and childlike. She was only 16. She was very excited to be a mum. She felt like this would give her life a lot of meaning. So she spent her days planning what it would be like when her baby was finally in her arms. She would make little outfits for her baby boy, and she was just super excited to eventually be a mum. And she felt like this was like her true calling in life and kind of what she was put here to do. She was quite ill during her pregnancy, and then when the time came to actually have her baby, when he was born, he unfortunately wasn't breathing. She remembered seeing him blue with his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, and she thought when they cut him free, he would eventually start to cry, but he never did. And of course, this devastated Elena, and it really broke her heart about how she never even got to hold her baby once before they took him away from her. And she wrote about how all babies need to be held, and it doesn't matter that he wasn't alive, that he was still her baby and she still wanted to hold him. It was really, actually really, really sad to hear. After this, she did continue to get more ill, and her friends and family thought that it was just due to her being so depressed because of what had happened to her baby, but she had developed quite a persistent cough. Her husband actually didn't stick around during this time, and he left Elena for another woman and moved himself off to Miami. And unfortunately, I don't really know a whole lot more about Elena's life up until the events that we're about to talk about today, so it is like a huge skip. I think she's like 17 here when we leave her with her baby just passing, and then the next time we know from her, she's about 20 years old. I think it was just before her 21st birthday, and her illness had worsened quite a bit, and as it turned out, she had tuberculosis, something that was very, very common in those days, and especially rife in the cigar factories like where her father worked. And the mortality rate for tuberculosis then was, if you had TB, you were probably more than likely going to die. So this takes us to the 22nd of April 1930, when Elena had been referred to the Marine Hospital for tests, and this is where she met her radiographer, Dr. Tanzler. His name is Carl, but I can't say that name. Carl. Glaswegians can't say the name Carl, so I'm just going to refer to him as Tanzler, but just no. Tanzler was born in 1877, making him 53 at the time when he met 20-year-old Elena. He was German-born, but at some point left Germany for Australia at the outbreak of World War I. He was in the military, I believe, but I'm not entirely sure what he did or what his involvement was, but I do know that he received a pretty good pension for whatever it was that he was doing. He also went by the name Count Von Cosel, as he says it was a name that was inherited by his royal ancestors, but many people have confirmed that he had absolutely zero royal lineage and he just made up this name to make himself sound important, pretty much. He also bragged 9 university degrees, and although he did have a lot of medical degrees, medals and licenses, it would later be found out that these were forged, and again, just another thing to make him seem more important than everybody else. He was really knowledgeable though on radiography, x-ray technology and medicine, hence why he became a radiographer at the Marine Hospital. He has been described as eccentric, self-important, and he definitely liked to show off that he had nice things and that he had money. He was just a very braggy, I'm better than you type of guy. In preparation for this video, not only did I listen to the podcast, but I also read his retelling of this What Happened. If you're interested in it, you can get it on PDF form online, and it is called The Secrets of Elena's Tomb, and it is a fascinating read. Really wacky stuff. And the impression I got of him, even though it's his own book and his own words, and if I was writing a book about myself, I would make myself sound as good as possible, but I'm reading this and I'm thinking, he is so far up his own arse. Like, he thinks he's better than everyone, he thinks he's smarter than everyone, and he was really fucking annoying me. Like, he didn't come across likeable, and if that's your retelling of yourself, imagine how unlikable you would have been in real life, because you're going to make yourself sound better, I can imagine. Basically, I feel like he was just a stuck-up prick, and that's, anyway, like, back to the story. In 1920, he returned back to Germany, and that's where he met his wife, Doris Schaefer. His wife and his children are never mentioned in any of his writings. He just conveniently left this part out. Anyway, some shit happened, he moved around a bit, blah blah blah, and in 1927, he left his wife and children to take a job as a radiographer at the Marine Hospital. 3 years later is when he meets Elena, a tuberculosis patient. The moment that Tanzler sees Elena, he becomes obsessed with her, and he believes that she is the one that he was always destined to be with, and not in the, like, oh, I've been waiting for you my whole life and I feel like you're the one, but in a, like, the ghost of my ancestor showed me you when I was a little boy and says that you were my promised bride kind of way, which is kind of different. Count Von fucking Freak Show over here claims that Elena had come to him in many visions throughout the years, and that his ancestor, Countess Anna, had like showed Elena to him and says, this is going to be your bride, and it just didn't, like, I believe in ghosts, okay? This just didn't happen though, did it? One time when she visited him, he was woken up from his bed and saw her standing there with a young girl hiding behind her. The Countess then told him not to tangle himself up in any other girl, as there was someone who was destined for him. It was then that she revealed the beautiful, raven-haired young girl who had been standing beside her, and this was who was to be his promised future bride. At this time, I think he was only like 11. He was just a little boy anyway when this had happened. Years later, when he was walking through a cemetery, he came face to face with a marble statue of the same girl that he had in this vision when he was a little boy. realising that this was the love of his life, and she was there in stone and not in the flesh. Presumably in the cemetery it was a statue of someone who had died. He started to cry, and the name of this girl on the statue was Elena, and she died at age 22. It was then that the apparition of the girl came out of the statue and started to walk into the crowd of mourners, and he tried to follow her, but eventually he lost her. But all he could remember was the name Elena, Elena, Elena. In 1912, his ghostly bride visited him again, this time staying at his home for an entire week, where they embraced, and she followed him around the house and even waited by his bed all night while he slept. And he says that she seemed really devoted to him, and that made him indescribably happy. The ghost never spoke to him, so he didn't catch her name, but he called her Aisha. This is weird for two reasons, apart from, like, the obvious. One, you knew that the girl in the cemetery was called Elena. So if you thought this was the same girl from the cemetery, why would you not call her Elena? Why did you call her Aisha? I don't know. Secondly, he went on to then call his daughter Aisha, which I don't know why I find that weird. I just find it unsettling. Anyway, when the ghost Aisha left him after 7 days, he was depressed as fuck and ended up in hospital, whatever, blah, 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 blah. He also went on and searched Havana and Cuba for his bride at one point, walking up and down the promenade for hours on end, as he believed that it was possible that he might find her there because he was surrounded by beautiful ladies of the Spanish type who wore fairy dresses and veils, so the resemblance seemed all the more possible. So like I said, they met at the hospital. He became obsessed with her and believed that she was the girl who was promised to him and that he'd been waiting on all these years since he was just a little boy. Obviously though, she was ill with tuberculosis, and like I says, the mortality rate was not great. So he swore that he would nurse her back to health, and because Elena's family were very poor, he offered to do this completely free of charge at their home. And obviously they weren't going to say no if he's saying, I can look after your daughter, I can make her healthy again. Without me, she's going to die. They're not going to be like, no, you creep, fuck off. Anyway, so throughout this time when she was under his care, he would concoct medicinal wines, elixirs made of gold, and a type of electric shock therapy. I'm not exactly sure what it was he was doing. He did describe it in the book, but I didn't really understand what he meant. I think he was using X-ray technology and electricity to try and heal her lungs and cure her, but I'm not entirely sure what was going on. Often these treatments would be incredibly painful for Elena, and she absolutely hated having them done. Tanzler speaks about her during this time as being very childlike, and her being very like a child is something that he references several times throughout his memoir. It does make me quite uncomfortable, but like, I know you can say, like, oh, they were very childlike, but he says it often, like, she spoke with a very soft, childlike voice. She thanked me with a happy little smile like a child. She was so childlike, and she loved little toys that I got her, like, very, like, condescending as well, you know. He also, like, speaks about her as if he felt like she was simple, and I'm sure she wasn't, but I think that's just how he seen her. Like, think about it, he's 30 years her senior with like a world of experience more than her. She's very frail, very vulnerable at this point, and she was fucking dying, like, and he's out here saying, oh, she's like a little child, and like so amused by how she's like fascinated by his little toys and little trinkets, and it's just all very like icky. During this time, he bought her lots of gifts like rings, a pearl necklace, crystal pendants, and other jewels. He also had a wingless plane that he kept on the grounds of the hospital, and he named this Countess Elena, and he would tell her how one day they would fly off together in this plane. And I don't think these things were done as like a token of his love. I think they were more done like, oh, you poor simple girl, here's something shiny. Again, just my opinion. Elena's family did not like the technology that Tanzler was using. They would refer to them as the devil's machines and believed that they were ungodly, which might sound silly to me and you, but remember, this was the 1930s, so this stuff was like incredibly new, and they were very devout Catholics, so they were very God-fearing. So when you think about it from their perspective, it might seem quite strange and frightening. Tanzler also talks about them, I feel, as if they were not very smart, and just because they weren't like a doctor like him, and I also got the impression that he just really wanted them to like back off and leave him to his own devices with Elena, as if they're just going to like hand over like their family member and be like, okay, she's your property now. I kind of feel like that is the impression that he gave. His first proposal of marriage was at Elena's sister Nana's wedding, and he said that she didn't get the chance to answer him before her mother interrupted, saying that no daughter of hers would marry an American, and if she married again, it would be to a Cuban man. He seemed to be very under the impression that it was because of her family that they weren't getting married, but according to his own account of events, it's wildly clear to me that she just was not interested in him. Like, no romantic interest in the fucking slightest. He even goes on to say himself that when he would continue to pester her for marriage, she said no, because for one, she was dying, and for two, he was far too old for her. And I think she was really just too polite to say, fuck off, you old pervert. When Nana was interviewed after everything had happened, she said that her sister had no interest in him at all in this way. She never loved him. She was only nice to him because my mother told her she should be kind to those who were kind to her. She looked upon Von Cosel as a grandfather, and when he proposed marriage, she always told him, you are too old. Why, you're old enough to be my grandfather. What's more, I do not love you. He became so persistent that we asked him to stay away from the house. In one of the letters that he wrote her after her father had kicked him out the house, he talks about getting her to come over to the plane, to christen it officially, calls her his darling Elena, says he's preparing for their wedding trip, and has bought her a silk dress, a bridal gown, and even lingerie, and then he signs it forever yours, Carl. And this was her reply to that. Dear Doctor, I'm so very sorry because I know how unpleasant your last visit to our home must have been. Please do forgive us. I'm sure Father did not really mean what he said to you. He had been on edge all day and had been very cross with everyone. Please understand that he didn't mean to be that rude. Both my family and myself would only be too glad to have you as our guest again, so please accept my apology for the other night. You must see us soon. Your friend, Elena De Hoyos. And his brain, after receiving this letter, tells him, oh my god, I definitely can't stay away. She's like mad in love with me, because what a Looney Tunes fucking psychopath. Not only did she address him Dear Doctor, she signed it Your Friend, so she probably like awkwardly ignored all the weird wedding shit because she's already told him a million times over that she wasn't fucking interested. And like, remember, she's just so fucking like, she it makes me angry. It's just wild how someone can be so fucking delusional, and all of this stuff is from his own confessional. He literally wrote this down and thought, yeah, that sounds like a mutual love. People are going to read that and think, yeah, this is like mutual, like she's in love with me. Going through this for this video, I went through so many emotions. First I found it interesting, then I started researching it more, and then it made me sad, and then piecing it all together when I was like actually scripting it, I started to get really fucking angry, and now I just feel really angry. It was not a mutual love affair. He took advantage of her when she was alive. He continued to take advantage of her after she was dead. It's not a love story, and I have no sympathy for this horrific, fucking, horrible man. In another letter that he wrote to her and told her that he's been dreaming where she fell into his arms and started kissing him, she instructed her sister to go and tell him, dream no more, like, fuck off. Can I also say, remember, he has a wife and children at this point, and his younger daughter at the time, who was only 10 years old, is dying right now, and he's off here chasing a 20-year-old who has no interest in him. Elena's family moved house and didn't tell Tanzler where they'd moved to, and instructed the neighbours not to tell him either. So he wandered the streets every night looking for their new home, and one of the new neighbours eventually took pity on him and told him where it was that they were staying. Pretty much, he went there and refused to leave. Like, that's the only way I can explain it. And maybe he just seemed as well like the only ray of hope, because Elena had grown so ill at this point. I mean, maybe they didn't really like him, but if you're desperate and facing death square in the, looking death square in the eye, you don't know what you'll do out of desperation, you know. He claims that Elena said to him, "If I must die, all I can leave you is my body, for I am only a sickly girl, so I can't marry you while I'm sick, but you will take care of my body after I'm dead, won't you?" He promised that he would, and considered this to be their marriage vow. He had actually resuscitated Elena twice from electric shock, and it got to the point where she actually begged her family that when she died again to let her stay dead, and they were under strict orders not to let Tanzler know that she was gone until it was absolutely too late for him to bring her back. And it is said that near the end of her life, she had grown to really hate Tanzler. And sadly, on the 25th of October 1931, at only 22 years old, Maria Elena Milagro De Hoyos passed away. Tanzler described the time of her death being like a rebirth to him, and at the funeral procession to him felt like a wedding march, and he actually cried tears of joy. He said he was happy that now no one could ever take Elena away from him, and she would forever be with him in spirit. He still continued to visit her family's home every night, even after Elena had died, and even though him and her family didn't get on with each other, he wanted to go and be in the room that Elena had died in. He basically went and told her family that he lived there now, and they could either accept him giving them rent every month, or they could leave and he would buy the house, and that was that. At one point, Elena's mum fell sick, and Tanzler actually managed to help her out, so that did kind of soften her way of being towards him, and she, was thankful that he managed to help her out, and she ended up gifting him some of Elena's hair from when she had cut her hair from long to a more shorter style. The reason for gifting this being that the grave Elena was buried in was pretty shallow and kept flooding with water, and Tanzler says he couldn't bear the thought of her decaying away in that horrible grave, so he was going to build a tomb for her where her body could be kept. He also told her mum that once he had moved the body into the tomb, he would decorate her hands with all her rings, and her mum was concerned at this point because she was like, why by that time she would have faded away, she'll be nothing but bones. And Tanzler says that he would never let that happen to her, and even if she lost all the hair on her head, he would buy her a wig, bring her new hair so that she could be buried in the tomb with dignity. But her mum said, don't use someone else's hair if you're going to do that. I have some of her own hair. And I just want to reiterate, this was so that she could look decent and beautiful and jewelled and put together in her final resting place. So he did manage to get a tomb built for her, and he only had one key cut. He was the only person with access to this tomb. And from when he lifted her from the shallow grave into the tomb, I don't know how long she'd been dead. According to the timeline, I'm going to guess a couple of months at this point, but decay had already set in quite a significant way. For instance, the lining of the coffin was attached to her face and body, so he spent hours trying to unpeel it from her, and he even cleaned her body and covered her in perfume so that he could get rid of the smell of decay from her. He then created an incubator that could go inside her coffin, and this incubator had a valve in it so that he could easily pour in solutions. He filled the entire tank with antiseptic and cell nourishing solution that I think he made, and this was to keep her preserved. And then this incubator was placed inside a metal casket. He visited the tomb every single night for 18 months. No one knew that he was doing this. He was the only one with the key to get in the tomb. And one night he fell asleep and he woke up with a very loud bang. And when he woke up and inspected what the bang was, he realised that 50 of the locks that was holding the metal casket closed had, as if by magic, sprung off and sprung open. And he knew that this was Elena playing a trick on her bridegroom for falling asleep in her presence. He then says that he heard scratching coming from the coffin and decided to open it up and inspect what was going on. So he opened up the outer coffin and then just the valve of the inner coffin, and the way he describes this really makes me ill. As I took the filter out, a strange and pleasant perfume emanated and spread over the room. There was no pressure of gas inside. There was only this mysterious smell which resembled a a fragrant smell in human blood, and not any manufactured perfume. It was exactly like the healthy and agreeable odour of a young woman's skin on a warm day. It was simply the typical odour which I loved so much about my bride Elena and of her hair. He also said that sometimes he would hold his hands over the valve so that the scent would go on his fingers and it would linger there for hours. First of all, if someone says that they liked the healthy and agreeable odour of my skin on a warm day, I would vomit in my mouth and then phone the police immediately. Secondly, this girl has been dead for almost 2 fucking years at this point. What you're smelling is a rotten corpse, you fucking freak. At one point, Elena came and spoke to him and said, I wish you would take me with you to your home. I want to stay with you. So from now on, when he went to visit her, they would talk to each other and he would bring her gifts. He said that sometimes she'd be silent for 15 minutes or even take days to reply, which in my opinion is still quite quick for someone who's been dead for almost 2 years. He said that although it sounded crazy, he knew that he could bring her back to life because he'd seen it happen before, and that he himself had died and been placed in the morgue for several days and then came back to life. There's a lot to unpack there, but I'm not sure we've got time for it, so let's just continue. Anyway, he decides that with supposed help from Elena, of course, to move her body from the tomb and into his house. He removed her body with the inner coffin and put it into a little wagon that he had brought with him so that he could transport it. And he left the outer coffin there in the tomb, so if ever you were to go and look, you would just see the outer coffin and, you know, not assume that someone had been in there and stole the body. And also to clarify, her family, of course, knew nothing of this, and he wasn't taking her back to their home, he was taking her back to a different home. So he moved her in the middle of the night so that no one would see him, but he has to, at one point, lift the coffin up and into his window, and from the way he describes it, he had to lift the full coffin with the body up and above his head and shoulders and push it into a window, which... a fucking coffin with a... That's insane. Like, that's insane. I don't even know how that's fucking possible. Anyway, as he's, like, pushing her coffin up, his leg gives way and he loses his balance, and the coffin comes crashing down and lands on his head and cuts all his head open. And then he begins to realise that there's other fluid dripping on him, and it's fluid from inside the coffin, so presumably liquefied corpse antiseptic cell nourishing solution that's been in there for 2 years is dripping all over him. And he speaks about how the smell was so strong and that dogs in the street had started barking and everything because the smell had travelled so much. And in his house that he had, there wasn't even running water at the moment, so he had to wash himself with just alcohol. Wash literal corpse fluid without... Anyway, he was keeping her in this little house just for a short time so that he could then transport her to his wingless plane that he had on the grounds of the hospital. The house was just like a kind of like in-between place to go to so that she would be out of the cemetery. So when he gets her to the plane, this is where he opens up her coffin, and of course she's started to decay and rot pretty badly. Again, just like the first time he resumed her body, the lining of the coffin and her clothes had all attached to her skin, while slime and mould had started to develop all over her. Her eyes had sunk into her skull, her lips had dried and shriveled, her chest had started to cave in, and from where he dropped her, like, in the coffin, it had broke her nose into her face, and he also found maggots feeding off her body. And then this bit, I'm just going to read directly from him. I don't think my commentary is necessary here. Then, kissing her dry lips and breathing deeply into her lungs until her bosom rose, I unpacked her bridal gown and covered her body with it. I draped her with the silk veil and adorned her head with a golden crown. She looked so wonderful now, I could not resist. The wondrous spell, and trembling with burning love, I sank gently into the coffin and kissed her as if she was still alive. He would wash her body, apply powders in places that needed to soak up moisture, apply bandages soaked with concoctions that he made to restore her cells, and he even stuffed her abdomen to fill out her body where she had started to sink in, and he had to straighten out some of her limbs using bandages and counterweights. And he would also feed her, and when I say feed her, I mean, a method he would often use would be to put something in his own mouth and then pass it into her mouth as a mother bird would do with a baby bird. What the actual fuck is going on? He put something in her skull to act as eyes. I can't even remember what it was. Does it even really fucking matter? And while he was making a death mask of her face, if you don't know what a death mask is, it's exactly as it sounds. It's a mask that, I mean, isn't super common now because we have like pictures and stuff, but people used to maybe make a mask of like their loved ones' faces using like plaster of Paris type thing, so that they could have like a mould of their face to like remember them and stuff the way that we would with pictures. So he made several death masks of her face, but he realised that when he was doing this and he applied fine silk and beeswax over her skin, that it would act as a really good protective layer to stop insects from getting to her and to stop her body decaying even more, and I guess like hold her together a little better. So he covered her whole face in silk and beeswax, almost like paper mache in a body. And all this work, according to him, was all an attempt to prepare her for when she came back to life, because if she returned to her body in the current state, she would die of shock and there would be no coming back the second time, because that's just too far-fetched. You can only come back one time. He said that she still had metabolism in her body because chemical reactions proved this, and there was always a surprise waiting for him when he went to check on her, which I actually don't really know what that means. This so-called trying to resurrect her went on for fucking years. He would cover her in plasma, feed her, she slept in the bed with him, he would play her music, and all of this in an attempt to bring her back to life that was not successful, and never once did he stop to think this is not going to work. He actually said that in this time he was successful in bringing her back to life. He had a conversation with her, she moved, she kissed him, she hugged him, but then she would always return to a rigid state. And he put this down to always being interrupted by people when he was trying to bring her back to life. If he'd just have been left to his own devices and had enough time to be consistent, then he would have brought her back to life. And this is actually mad. So in this time, he moved house, and like from the plane to somewhere else, and so Nana, Elena's sister, her husband helped him move and didn't know that he was moving his like dead sister-in-law's body. I don't know if she was like in a car or what, but he helped him move like all the stuff, and like obviously fucking horrifying, didn't know what he was moving. Anyway, so Tanzler eventually says that his ultimate plan for Elena was to shoot her body into the stratosphere so that radiation from outer space could penetrate her tissues, and this is what would bring her back to life. So at this point, it's been 7 years since Tanzler stole her body from the cemetery. 9 years since she died, and at this point, he's getting away with it. But it so happened that there was an incident at the cemetery where the tomb was broken into and the coffin had been tampered with. This freaked out Elena's sister Nana, rightfully so, and she asked Tanzler to open the coffin just to make sure that no one had done anything weird with her sister, and he point blank refused. So she threatened to involve the law and have it forcibly opened. I think she must just have had like a really horrible, gross feeling, and maybe didn't know exactly what was going on, but I think she did just maybe have like a real horrible feeling that some bad shit was going on. I don't think your mind would immediately jump to, he's been living with my sister's corpse for the last 7 years, but she says that she felt like she was going to go crazy if she didn't just get to see her sister's body as proof that she was still in the coffin. Also, around town there was a lot of talk and a lot of curiosity about why a man who lived alone was often seen buying dresses, buying perfume, buying things that would typically be used for a woman, but he didn't have a lady friend. And one of the young boys on the street had actually claimed to have seen him dancing in the window with a life-sized doll, which was creepy and, as we know, not a doll. So Nana took matters into her own hands and decided to confront Tanzler at his home, and this is where she discovered the horrifying truth that he hadn't been living with a life-size doll, but that he had been living with her sister's corpse. So of course she contacts authorities and they investigate, take Tanzler away, and I don't really know where to put this bit in, but it was later found in an autopsy report that all of that stuff that he'd done to her body he had done, but there had also been a tube that was inserted into Elena's vagina to make sexual intercourse possible, which Tanzler has always conveniently forgot to mention. So Tanzler was arrested on account of wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization, and he also had to undergo psychiatric evaluation where they deemed him competent to stand trial, but charges were dropped on account of the statute of limitations for the crime being expired. And I really don't fully comprehend the statute of limitations, because from what I can understand, if a crime had been committed over X amount of time ago, then if you've managed to get away with it all that time, then you just get away with it. Is that not just rewarding people for doing bad things and receiving no punishment as long as you're like clever enough to not get caught? Like, I don't really understand. Like, you still did the crime and there was no punishment. I don't get it. So he was just free to go and live his life. He was free to go and do whatever he wanted, and he went to go and live nearby where his wife and sister lived, but not before blowing up Elena's tomb with a time bomb. Okay. Now, you would think that everyone is on the same page here, and I'm hoping you're on the same page that I'm on, and I'm thinking, this fucker is wrong, he's disgusting, he should go to jail immediately. Like, you know, like, I can assume that's like the vibe most of us are on, but he actually received an outpouring of love from many people. He was like deemed like a hopeless romantic, and he even had many female admirers after him, like saying how like what he done was romantic and heroic, and it's just fucking insane. People would travel to Key West to go and meet him and take pictures with him as if he was a celebrity, and even like an attorney offered to like just be his attorney just free of charge because like they respected what he'd done. Like, loads of people were just like super fucking nice to him about it. And in 1952, Tanzler was found dead in his home, where he had made a replica of Elena's body using one of her death masks for her face. Some people still suspect that it was Elena's real body that he was found with, and he'd somehow paid to have it given back to him, or managed to swap her body with a different body, but I don't know if I think that's true. I don't think so, but honestly, with this story, who the fuck knows? And another one of the theories surrounding this is that although it's assumed that Elena's cause of death was tuberculosis, there are some theories that actually suggest that Tanzler killed her. And you might be thinking, if he loved her so much, why would he kill her? And probably because she wasn't interested, and he knew that she would never, and he knew that she would never be interested in him, and he wanted to like keep her and have her anyway, so maybe he thought that killing her was his only way of doing this. And like, I think that's perfectly plausible. Like, if I can't have you, then you don't get to live, like, type thing. And you might also be thinking, why would he kill her and then continuously try and bring her back to life for 7 years? And to that I say, says who? Like, who says he was trying to bring her back for 7 years? Like, who said that's what he was trying to do? Like, there is absolutely like no proof that he was like attempting to bring her back to life. he could just have been trying to keep her body in a good state and stop her from like decomposing too much for his own like sick pleasure, because maybe he was just like a raging necrophiliac. We just have his word that he was like devastated that she died and wanted to bring her back to life. And there is some weight to this theory as well, because Nana said that Tanzler had actually warned her father, if there's not a marriage in this family soon, there will be a funeral. And then the chief of police at the time claimed that Tanzler told him, I have spent my whole life, I have roamed the earth searching for Elena. 50 years ago she appeared to me in a vision and she promised then to be my bride. Now I've found her and I'll kill her if necessary to fulfill my destiny. In fact, many people from the neighbourhood claim that the week before Elena died, Tanzler was forcing her to drink double doses of his golden elixir. And this golden elixir was distilled water, 20% gold shavings, fruit flavouring, and just enough poison to induce a slow death. Also, in an article wrote in 1982, people were renovating a cottage and in the wall they found empty bottles of Tanzler's so-called golden elixir, along with incriminating evidence, including what seemed to be a confession note that read, she died because I gave this to her mercifully. I mixed the root of wolfsbane with aconite diluted. It was palatable and my loved one departed this miserable world on October 25th, 1931. Suffer no more, sweet Elena. I have sent you to the angels with my golden elixir. I think it's quite plausible quite possible that he did kill her, but let me know what you think on that one. I'd actually be really interested to hear what you had to say. So back to Elena, the whole point of this. When her body was taken from Tanzler's possession, you would hope that she would finally be laid to rest in a peaceful, dignified way, but she was continuously exploited. Once again, she was put on display at the Dean Lopez funeral home for over 6,850 people to come and gawp at her like she was some kind of fucking circus act or something. And I just think it's so disrespectful. Like, after all of that, like, again, just to be like used like an object or like your public property, or it's just But eventually she was laid to rest. She has been buried in an unmarked grave so that no one can ever go and do to her what Tanzler did to her. And that brings us to the end of the video. I hope that I have told this in a way that is respectful to Elena and puts her at the forefront of everything that happened, because it is about her, and I hope I've told this in a more truthful way, hopefully as close to what it actually is as possible. Not a great love story, but something really tragic and really horrific. I think the only thing I've got left to say now is that I hope that Elena's spirit has found some peace, and it was incredibly sad and she didn't deserve what happened to her to happen to her. And this really is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed and you would like to see more videos, please subscribe to my channel, give my video a thumbs up and comment, because that really helps with engagement as well and helps me to grow this channel, which is a little hope and dream of mine. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!